And thanks everyone for joining me this afternoon. So yeah, we are going to talk about Splunk and Jamf. Let me start by introducing myself. So I am Martin. I work here at SIG in the client platform team, very much looking after all the Macs and anything Apple. Would have seen James this morning. Yeah, we are indeed in the same team. Here at the bottom, you can find the link to my GitHub repo with all the resources that I'm going to talk about today. You can find me as Ufti on MacAdmins, and here's my LinkedIn as well if you would like to connect. So today we're going to talk about Splunk. We'll start with a quick overview of the setup, then we'll move into searches, alerts, and eventually build up to dashboards. First thing first, what is Splunk? Now, can I get a quick show of hands? Who here knows what Splunk is? Great. And who actually uses it in their environment? There you go. Cool. All right. So, if you ask our lovely ChatGPT, you get a nice big blurb like this about Splunk. In summary, Splunk, it's a cloud platform. You use it to collect and index all your data that you send to it. And then from there, you can search, visualize, create some reports, and mostly create alerts on it. So why would you want to use Splunk? Well, here we use it for a few things. To automate reporting, to create alerts so that we know when things go wrong, to empower other teams that might not have the full access to Jamf, but they have access to Splunk, so they can actually get the data. And also, sometimes it's always good for bragging rights. For example, look at this. That's the chart of what happened to our vulnerability tracker, when we started implementing Installer about a year ago. We went from, 12,000 issues of vulnerabilities to virtually nothing. So, access to that data is great. And this is what we're going to build towards. So this is an idea of what a dashboard can look like, where you can get all kind of data and stats about your policies, for example. So, setup. I'm not going to spend too much time on setup because there's plenty of documentation out there already, and I actually want to spend more time on the searches and what we do with the data itself. So just a quick few notes though. First, you want to set up the Jamf Pro add-on for Splunk. That's a first-party tool that is reasonably easy to set up, and then you can customize it slightly. So what we've done here on our end, we've basically ticked every single option in terms of what data we can collect. What we have also changed is in the interval, by default, it's set to collect data every 30 minutes. That ends up generating a lot of data and taking a lot of storage. Because we've got a limited amount of storage in our Splunk instance, we've shrunk it down to basically only once a day, which is, for us, more than enough. Webhooks. So Webhooks is something we only started using about 6 months ago, but that really opened up our reporting capabilities. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, just a few gotchas that we found. In terms of the webhook URL, a lot of guides were telling us to use the collector/event, but it turns out that Jamf doesn't format it the way that Splunk can interpret it. So what we have done is, once we've moved the /raw to just send the raw data, then we saw the events coming up in Splunk, and it started working quite great. Same for the header authentication. There was no good documentation of how you should format it. So after a bit of trial and error, this is what we landed on. If you want to steal that off us, go for it and start Splunking. Jamf has got heaps of collection point that you can use and webhooks that you can use to report your data. We've only picked 4 of them. There's a lot more. We might add some more down the road. So just have a look, see what you see there, and just pick whatever is suitable and relevant to you. One last thing that we did is upload a CSV file to match our policy IDs and policy names, because by default, the event will only report on the policy ID. Having the policy name makes it a lot more user-friendly. So this is an extract of the script, which you can find on my GitHub to just export the CSV. From there, if you go into Splunk settings, you can go in the lookup, and first you add the file, then you add the lookup definition, and eventually you set up an automatic lookup so that as soon as you start referring to that policy name, it will show up in your results. One last thing you might want to do in terms of settings is changing your default user preferences. It's a bit like Jamf, at the beginning, it's very vanilla and you want to go and tweak it a bit. Well, here it's the same. Ticking the advanced editor, auto format, and full search assistant really helps making more sense of what's going on there on the screen. All right, let's go straight in. Let's go into the good stuff. This is Splunk. When you go in the first time, it can get a bit overwhelming because there's a lot going on there. And as you can see, in the last 24 hours, we've generated millions of events. So it's a lot. And the way Splunk works is that in the search bar here, you will enter your searches using the SPL, the search programming language. And it works a bit like Shell in that you can pipe one function into the other to refine your search until you get to the data that you're actually after. Now, this is live data, so I'm not going to start clicking everywhere because there might be some PII information that I can't show you, but I've got some test data here that we can play with. So here's a couple of test computers. And again, we're looking at the last 24 hours. So, not that much time, but you'll see that we still get a truckload of events. That's because everything we ticked earlier when we set up the add-in, well, that will generate an event for each app, each certificate, each font installed on every computer. So that's how we get to 25,000 or so events in 24 hours, even though we're only looking at a handful of computers. But what you can do, though, once you've got all this, is you can start clicking around and trying to make sense of the data. And you see that each event, for example, has got this computer meta in there that seems to be in every event. Great, maybe we can use that later. And then we've got our computer security, for example. And again, if you're familiar with the way Jamf displays the inventory on the Jamf Pro console, well, you'll see that this is familiar. It's just a different way of showing it. So there's a lot going on there. And you see, like, for example, disk partition and certificate and apps. So that's why there's so many events out there. But so let's try to focus maybe on one that is actually fun to look at. For example, here, computer OS version. All right, let's see what happens there. What I'm going to do here is open heaps of tabs at once so that they can preload and we can hopefully save a bit of time. Now, you realize that when I'm doing that, basically the way Splunk works is that every time you do a search, it will generate a unique URL. So for what we're doing today, it's quite great because I could bookmark all my searches and now we can just refer to them. And if you had to share those with your colleagues, as long as you've got access to the same index in Splunk, you're great. By the way, talking about index, you can see here that our index is called Jamf. Yours might be called like that. It might be called something different. So when you start your Splunk journey, make sure that you use the right index to, of course, display the right data. So here, we're looking at any event within the Jamf index over the last 24 hours with a computer OS version. Great, but that's 81,000 of them. We don't have that many computers, fortunately. So what's going on here is that, again, because there's so many events for each computer, we get a lot of duplicate data. So to get rid of that, you use the dedupe function. And now by filtering by using that computer meta ID, which is the JSS ID if you're wondering, we can now narrow it down to, 1,278 computers, which sounds about right. So that's how many computers we have. And now we know we're getting where we want to in terms of data. But it's still very random and not that useful just yet. Now, one great thing about Splunk is that it will keep historical data. So you can literally go back in time. So if instead of using the dedupe, we were to use something like time chart, and within time chart, we can use DC for distinctive count and still use the metadata ID as a unique identifier, we can now get into something like this. So now it's starting to look a lot prettier. So here we can see the evolution of macOS 13.2.1 and how it gets adopted over time. And we see all the others going down. Great, so we're getting somewhere. It's not quite yet what I want. What if I wanted to see just macOS 12, for example? Well, I could just do something like this. And now I got all my macOS 12 into one single line that will show me that indeed, well, Monterey is going down just as you want it. Okay, so wouldn't it be great if I could add on top of that, well, Ventura? Of course it is. And for that, you can use another function that's quite useful called append calls. And by doing that, you're basically adding a second column in your existing chart and producing something like this. So now all of a sudden we're seeing that, yeah, Ventura is definitely going up, Monterey is going down. That's exactly what you want. Now, as you can tell, our historical data goes back about 3 weeks. So we can't go as far back as we want unless you've got unlimited money and unlimited storage, which I hope you do. But yeah, basically that magical point where Ventura took over Monterey, well, we've lost that. But you know, with macOS, I guess 14 coming down the road, we'll be aiming towards another crisscross eventually. So yeah, that's something that is actually quite useful that you might want to then throw on a dashboard and start reporting on. Now, in Jamf, we love doing things like extension attributes. There's plenty of great data collected in Jamf, but it doesn't grab everything we want. So we love creating extension attributes to grab that relevant data for us. How could we pipe that into Splunk? Well, the easiest one is using smart groups. So you can't pipe the customer attribute, the EA into Splunk, but you can definitely look up group membership. So as long as you can create a group, a smart group that refers to that attribute, you can get to something like this. So this is a bit of a fun one. This is the amount of devices we've got in this office on a daily basis. And as you can tell, every Thursday seems to be the most popular one. That's probably because we opened the bar upstairs. But you could use this for something much more relevant, like, for example, devices that doesn't have your EDR installed, or your cloud proxy isn't connected. Any smart group you can think of, you can report in within Splunk. Okay, now let's look at webhooks. Webhooks is when it really gets interesting, because that policy successful one is definitely one that opened up the floodgates for us in terms of reporting. So first thing you got to do is add an extra source, because otherwise you get, mixed up with all the add-in data that, again, probably is too overwhelming. So you see that we've got a lot less event. We still have a fair few though. So again, live data. So let's move into our test one. And now I can start looking around. You see that there's a lot less event, but for us, it actually works. So what do we get? We get our webhook. So yeah, it's definitely one of the computer policy finished. Great. And then we see that its policy ID X. It was indeed successful. And that's the computer data. Okay, so it's not that much, but it's enough. That's all we need. So remember what we did earlier when we uploaded the CSV? Well, basically now, the second I start referring on that policy name, I will be able to see that policy name in each event. Now, you won't see that in the raw data. That's still very much, well, the raw data coming from Jamf. But if you click on that magical triangle there, you'll see that what Splunk is doing with it. And now, because we've got that auto lookup, we see the update, the policy name that shows up there. So now we can start clicking around and see what's going on. Yeah, so a lot of update inventory. Great. What else have we got? Oh, here we go. Patching Slack. Okay. So fortunately here, our naming convention for policies is quite good and quite consistent. So I could look at something like, show me all the patch policies by doing a search with a patch and a wildcard. So now I can see that over the last 7 days, we did about 4,500 patching. Cool. Where do we go from here? Well, first I could pipe that into the stats count function and get a big fat number, mostly for maybe reporting. So that I could throw on a dashboard and then refer to that later. So I know I've got, 4,500 total policies, great. And then if I look at only the successful one, I see that I'm looking at about 4,200. So there's 300 policies that have failed over the last 7 days. Okay, but how can I try to figure something out with them and actually get to the core of it so that I can basically prioritize my work? If a policy is failing more than others, that's probably something I want to look at and start actioning. So this might be the most complicated piece of language of SPL that I'm showing you today, but if we break it down, it's not as bad. So we're using the event stats function, and in there, we're basically putting together all the successful and all the failed policies. From here, we then work on a percentage, and we split that up by policy name. So now again, if I click on that magical triangle, we can see that, okay, patch zoom, over the last 7 days, 236 success, 20 failures, so my failure rate in percent is about 8.5. Okay, and once again, you can just click around and see what's going on. Yep, so a lot of patching happening, that's fair, that's to be expected. Every now and then, yeah, you might get some that just say 0, great, 100% success, that's what I want. So let's try to refine this a bit more, and again, find relevant data for us to action. Well, if we just add one more line there to say, only show me those policies with a failure rate of more than 1%. Okay, great. So now I know that every time I click around, I'll see things that are failing more than 1%. This is good, but it's still not overly visual, is it? So if we were now to add on top of this a time chart and move into a nice, maybe column view, we get something like this. And now all of a sudden that becomes a lot more useful. Now I can see here that, oh, Git Kraken, 500% failure rate. Maybe there's something we need to look at there. I actually did look at that during my rehearsal over the last few days. So you gotta remember this is a percentage. We had 1 success, 5 failure. So that's how you get to such high numbers. It's a very small policy that's not happening on that many computers, and it turns out that it's Installer right now that is not working for Git Kraken. So I've disabled that policy. I'm going to look into that on Monday. But yeah, you got to remember that, especially when you use things like Installer, it can happen. And having a high number of failures is not always critical, but it's definitely something you want to investigate. So from here, we can move into some alerting, because it's great to be able to go in Splunk and see all that data, but sometimes, you know, your day gets away from you, you don't have time to go, you forget to go. So getting some automated alerts is definitely something that you want to set up and probably know about. This one, for example, it's more of an FYI. It's not really an alert, but still, it's good to know. Every time a device is added to DEP, just send me a message. And we've created a specific Slack channel for that, and all our Jamf notification will just go there so that we know what's going on. What about this one? API usage. Now that's something that, as far as I know, is very hard to actually get and understand how much is that API being used. So here's an alert that every time the API is being used for put or post, let me know about it. And in most cases, it will be us, Mac admin, doing things. But it's still good to know and keep an eye on, because, well, you know, you can do a fair bit of damage with those APIs. This is something that should be hopefully familiar for you now. Policy failure. Here we're going for 4%, because we know overall our policy failure is usually between 2 and 3%. So we know that if we hit 4%, that means something is very likely going wrong and we want to know about it. And this is what it looks like when it hits Slack. So you get, you know, you can customize the notification. Here we say, yeah, maybe just have a look at the dashboard because there's something you want to look into. So yeah, that's a great way to use alerting to get automated well, reporting and alerts. Okay, now that we got all that, let's have a look at dashboards. Let's go back in live because it's just much more fun. And once again, I'm going to open a fair few of them. And here, let's be honest, it's going to take a while for them to load because we're going through a lot of data. And I guess that's why Splunk loves charging you so much money, because when you have people like me just playing around in there all day, you do use a bit of resources. But here's the first one, Mac execs report. So your leads might have to, on a monthly basis, report to execs and say, hey, just high overview, this is everything we've done this month. Yeah, before you could go in Jamf or anything and try to do some report, or you could even do it in Splunk and run it manually. Or you can just create a dashboard, send a link to your lead and say, yeah, figure it out now. They just take a screenshot. So yeah, what about this one? Still loading. Okay, maybe let's refresh. No, we just need to give it another second. So what's happening here? Well, this one is using a lot of those smart groups that I mentioned earlier. So we've got one for the EDR. We've got one for the cloud proxy. Now you can get SIP and file vault or firewall by default. That gets reported in an event. But if you're a bit lazy and you want to use smart group for all of that so that you don't have to find the right, you know, code or wording for it, you're more than welcome to. What I've added here as well is a bit of a filter for all our different countries, because that allows each of our local service desk team to be able to go in, open it up and say, okay, here in Hong Kong, we've got 3 computers that might need to be, looked at because the EDI isn't installed. So that empowers those teams to just go in and try to fix things without us always having to mention that to them. Now, the next 2 dashboards are not mine. I will not take credit for them. They came from Jamf. So if you want to reach out to your very friendly Jamf customer success manager, feel free to. And I reckon they should be able to share that with you. And this was a great point for me to start, because that's realistically how I started my Splunk journey. I got those dashboards, and then you start clicking around and see what's going on. So here, for example, let's have a look at, and once again, you got to be a little bit patient sometimes. Let's look at Firefox. And here you can see how many times is Firefox installed in your fleet. Of course, there's no version from the Mac App Store, so that one is an easy one. But here, look at the bottom. You can see your patching cycles. There's a new version comes out, gets installed, and then the next one in, and you see those, those nice little curve down there. So it's just nice to look at sometimes, Here's another one provided by Jamf. That's quite great. And what you have to remember is that when you're in a dashboard like this, at any time, you can always say, open in search. And that will show you what code, what SPL they've used for this. So if you're new to Splunk, it's a great way to get into it and say, okay, so that dedupe function, okay, and then start scan, and you start, training your brain to read that code and how to make the most of it. All right, these last 2 are mine, so you will find them on my GitHub repo if you want to. One is specific to patch reporting. So again, using all those filters, I was able to get this together: total success, failure, and the percentage. The one that are topping in terms of failure, so maybe something we want to look into. And here at the bottom, you see that Monterey versus Ventura that we looked at earlier. And so all this is just there, and it's a much more user-friendly way to go through all that data that Jamf is producing. Now, this is the screenshot you might remember from the beginning of this presentation. So again, very useful data here. And here I've got those failing policies presented in 2 different ways. One is in just overall percentage. But for example, that Git Kraken, it's good, but is it that important for me to look at next to, for example, LastPass? LastPass is failing 86 times. Maybe I need to look at that one first. It might not be as high as a failure rate, but it's failing more. So this is a great way for you to have a look at what's going on and decide what you want to work on next. All right, back into here, because there's one more dashboard I want to show you, but I can't show that one live to you. It's the API stats. So once again, here you can just report which username, what it is doing, what it's accessing, and how many times. So super useful if you want to make sure that nothing dodgy is happening on your environment. All right, so all that to bring us to the end, and a few things for you to take out of this. Definitely add webhooks, like that policy finished webhook is super useful and will really elevate the reporting you can do. Set up alerts so that if you are too busy, you will still know if something important is happening. Ask for help. Ask for help from Jamf, ask for help on Google, or ask around in your company. Like, we've got some great Splunk admins here that I've definitely now made really good friends with, because yeah, they just help you, especially at the beginning of your journey, so that you get to understand a bit more how it works. And you'll probably need them for the setup anyway, because they've got the right admin rights. Last but not least, don't freak out. It's a bit overwhelming. There's a lot going on there, but go easy, start clicking around, try to find some patterns, learn the SPL, build your search, and you'll get there. So I would like to thank Seek for this, because they've allowed me to spend maybe a few too many hours on this over the last few weeks. So thanks for enabling me with that. Thank you, Jamf, because as I said, those few dashboards have definitely helped to start and pick up on what's going on. Google is always a great resource. ChatGPT right now is not. It does not know what the SPL is. So once again, my resource, my contact's there. So jump on GitHub. I'll be here for the rest of the week anyway. So if you want to come and say hi, feel free to. See a few more pictures, but yeah, that's it for me. So do we have any questions? Don't know how much time we got. Yeah? Plenty of time. Cool. Questions? Anyone? Yep.
What challenges are you seeing monitoring maps with Splunk at the moment? Like obviously you've got a monthly thing, what things are you sort of having trouble with?
Well, right now it's more of, sorry, I'm repeating the question. What challenges am I experiencing with monitoring Macs with Splunk? I guess the biggest one might be that we're not using Jamf Protect, so all the security bits, I got to rely on those smart groups. But all in all, it's been a very pleasant experience because all these, while you can get a bit of that in Jamf, I think Splunk really elevates and enables you to do a lot more. Anyone else?
Are you finding your security techniques to be moved to the dashboards?
No, it's more the architects than the security. Security have got their own dashboard that, sorry, repeating. Yeah, so do I find that security is interested in that reporting? Well, no, because I'm pretty sure they have their own that we just don't have access to. So yeah, it's more like architectures and maybe some BAs or PMs that like to see the data and just are a bit curious. Cool. Thanks, everyone.